Jesus Christ has self-disclosed himself as the creator of all things, as the origin point for all truth, facts, and knowledge. It only follows that the rejection of his self-disclosure would lead to ultimate unintelligibility to any given statement one would reference about the ultimate nature of reality. If a person has rejected the foundation and the basis and the grounding for all facts, they ultimately have no basis for their facts. When an atheist is pressed upon the causal nature linking any given fact to an anchor point, they will ultimately not provide one. Which means they are only providing baseless information that is not ultimately founded on anything. We call this unintelligibility. The following conversation is between a Christian apologist and an atheist.
But you believe in the God of the Bible because he is the origin point for all reasoning to actually make.
No, the reason why I believe in the God of the Bible is for the only reason possible. Okay, now. I want you to imagine that the God of the Bible exists. What's the only reason that I could know that he exists? There's only one reason how I could know that he exists. There aren't multiple reasons. There's only one reason. How can I know that the personal absolute exists? How would I be able to know of the existence of that which is absolute? How can I possibly know? If it's impersonal, how would I know? If it's personal, how would I know? Well, the answer is the same reason how you know your mother's middle name. It's communicated to you. It's disclosed. The God of the Bible has disclosed his existence through natural and special revelation. God's existence is revealed in the entire creation. Okay? Romans 1 is very clear. It says that which can be known about God is clearly seen. His eternal power has been clearly seen through what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Well, how does that follow? If you believe that anything exists, then you're going to have to believe that something's absolute. And if you have apprehension, if you have rational apprehension that something exists, then that which is absolute must be personal and rational. Because if you don't accept that, then you're going to have to explain how the ultimacy of reality being non-rational will produce or exude rationality. You have an antithesis that rationality exudes from non-rationality. Okay?
Yeah.
So atheists will not deny that they're rational. In other words, when they say, I don't have a good reason to believe in God, they're implicitly claiming to be rational. On what grounds, in their world where they reject that the ultimacy of reality is personal, on what grounds can they be rational? Merely saying it's an emergent property is simply begging the question. How in a world of a myriad of stuff happening is a small subset of the greater set of stuff happening rational? Okay? So when we talk about stuff happening, either stuff happening are just simply spontaneous chance occurrences, or someone will believe that all that stuff happening are cascading cause and effect and laws of nature. They're first going to have to establish that there's the causal principle and laws of nature, which they will not be able to do on rational grounds. Number two, even if I were to grant that, how do you have rationality where there is a completely determined cascading events of cause and effect? So you see, God has given self-disclosure that he is eternal, right? Something must be eternal. Something must be unconditionally non-dependent and absolute in order for anything to exist. And it has to be rational, otherwise I can't be rational. And if somebody says, oh no, I don't accept that, say, good, then you're going to have to explain how you can be rational in the midst your worldview, where the ultimacy of reality is non-rational. See, even the most craven atheist can see how one can be rational when it is granted to them by a personal absolute creator God who himself is rational, and he simply bestows upon his creation that which he is. But when you reject that, how do you have rationality? So the answer is, I know God exists because he has given disclosure of himself through natural revelation and special revelation. Now, when the atheist rejects that, they claim that they're rejecting it on evidentiary grounds, which is ridiculous. Because then you ask, how did you determine that no facts have their causal relation or origin in God? Because when you say there's no evidence for God, you're specifying that there's no relation. And what then they'll say is they'll try to retort to their mental state and say, well, I'm unaware of it. Well, you being unaware of it doesn't mean that there's no causal relation. But even if you say you're unaware or I don't know, that's still a de facto denial. You're still operating that facts can be facts without reference to a personal absolute. And if you take that position, you have denied the existence of God. And so they're going to have to explain why all facts are not indicative of a personal absolute. How are all facts indicative of an impersonal absolute? Because that's the position that they're operating from. Because if you do not accept that the personal absolute exists, namely God, then you're operating from that the impersonal absolute exists that provides for all dependency states, including yourself. Well, how did you account for that? Because in order for the fact to be fact, it's going to have to be derivative of something that's absolute. And in the atheist case, it's going to be an impersonal absolute. Well, how do they account for that? Because they want the personal absolute to be accounted for. So the worldview they're operating from is that there's an impersonal absolute from which all dependency situations come from. So how do they rationally account for that? The answer is they don't. And when they don't, and because they don't, they violate their own principle. They're contradicting themselves. Any questions, comments?
From me, no.
What I'd like to know is, are you now an atheist?
Am I now an atheist? Like after you've told me your position on like your rebuttal of atheism?
Are you currently an atheist?
I mean, I can't just ditch it in 1 second. I'll have to give it like some thought,
Okay. Yeah. I'm just pointing out that atheism, the embrace of atheism, is incoherent. And if atheism is incoherent, then there's only one option left for to live in a coherent world, that there's a personal absolute.
Right.
This is why the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians, has not God demonstrated that the wisdom of the world is foolishness? Because the wisdom of the world is to speak forth certain facts that are intelligible with respect to their system. But since they claim not to accept God, how are those facts intelligible? What is the framework? What is the canvas that provides for the intelligibility of facts? The reason why you should not only accept theism, Christian theism is the only option, because the non-acceptance of God's self-disclosure of himself through natural and special revelation will result in incoherency of any worldview. And if somebody says, well, that's a bunch of bunk, I don't buy that, I say, fine. Then tell me how your worldview is coherent. Tell me how you establish your model of reality that will then be the framework or the canvas that provides for the intelligibility of facts based upon the principle that you invoke, that you require to be fulfilled in order to believe in God or the Christian God?
Yeah.
And the answer is they can't answer that. And they think they just want to chalk it up. They think it's a trick question. It's not.
Yeah, I'm like guessing that you've actually like run this argument on a lot of atheists.
Yeah, it's this. It's called, listen, there are certain things that you believe. You do not believe it because you have evidence for it. You believe it because if you don't, you will be plunged into incoherence. Let me give you an example. When you go and walk your dog or you get a cheeseburger or whatever, every day you have experiences that you think are causal sequencing. Okay? Now, the events that you experience do not necessitate that there are causal connections between events. You accept the causal principle that there is causal sequencing between events in general. Because if you don't, everything will be absurd. If all events are spontaneous, just bing, 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 they're happening for no apparent reason at all, and they're not the product of causal sequencing, then there cannot be rational discourse about the chronology of events, right? So from a secular perspective, the only reason why you accept the causal principle is due to the impossibility of the contrary. The contrary would be that there isn't cause and effect. So just think about any statements you make without the implicit premise of the causal principle. That would render any statements you make to be meaningless. If I said to you, I saw the dog running in the backyard, that statement presupposes the causal principle for the meaningfulness and intelligibility of that statement. And if you don't accept the causal principle, then there is no meaningfulness or intelligibility to the statement the dog is running in the backyard. Now, the same thing is true of God. If you reject God as the origin point, as the ultimacy of reality, the absolute, then you're not going to have intelligibility for facts, even though you think you can. Atheists laugh at this. They think that they can have intelligibility. But you see, they only think that because they're in denial. Because when I start questioning them, I say, fine, explain to me how you can have intelligibility for facts, given your worldview and your framework, your canvas of reality, without the personal absolute creator God of the Bible. And that's when the obstructionism starts to come in. That's when they start to be deceptive, either overtly or covertly. Because they don't want to be pushed into a corner where they have nowhere to turn. And that's why when I go from server to server to server, we see varying degrees of animalistic behavior and trolling behavior. What else are they going to do? Are they going to admit that their position is complete and utter foolishness? If I told you that you're wrong about anything or everything because the moon is filled with green cheese and clowns hopscotch with a jump rope, you would say that's utter foolishness. Why? Because it doesn't mean there's no connection between any of that. Well, if you have a worldview where you have no basis for anything, you have no backdrop, you have no framework that you can rationally account for, then everything is foolishness. You can't demonstrate any relations or connections between anything. So the way you can know that Christianity is true, God's self-disclosure of himself, is to the impossibility of its denial. Just like if somebody came along to you and started speaking to you that there isn't the causal principle, that there isn't causation going on. At a certain point, you're going to just say, dude, you are a fool. You are a babbling maniac. Because if you don't accept the causal principle, you can't establish intelligibility for any facts. Well, the same is true with the God of the Bible, the non-acceptance of the God of the Bible. And you see, at this point, what skeptics will do is they'll start to invoke parodies of the Christian God in order to avoid the Christian God. But what they don't realize from a theological perspective is you need the very properties of the Christian God, the properties and attributes of the Christian God, as a foundation for intelligibility. In other words, the triune nature of God and his sovereign plan for human history is required for intelligibility. And people think that's ridiculous. They'll say, good. Explain to me why it would be meaningful and intelligible to say the boy is eating the banana if we don't have the triune God of Scripture and he has a sovereign plan for human history. How would the statement, the little boy is eating the banana, be intelligible? The reason why it's intelligible is, number one, the absolute exists. That absolute is personal. He's the God of the Bible, and he has a sovereign plan that he secures for human history so that we can know things, that certain things can be rationally understood and apprehendable in a world that he creates, right? And his sovereignty and his omnipotence and his always truth-revealing nature secures that the statement, the little boy is eating the banana, can be rationally apprehendable and intelligible. But if somebody says, oh, no, I'm going to go with Allah. Well, the only reason why they're invoking Allah is to run away from the Christian God. Isn't it amazing how so many skeptics, when I show them that they're in a sea of incoherence without the Christian God, they will immediately start to invoke parodies of the Christian God. Interesting, huh?